Hey everybody, and welcome back to Collegiate Tech. My name is John, and I'm a cybersecurity student in my junior year of college.
And I'm Michael, and I'm a senior studying digital media video production.
So today we'd like to have a brief discussion about the problems we see when it comes to technology degrees in higher education, and how we feel like those degrees are not actually preparing people for the workforce.
So basically across the board, there seems to be basically like a severe lack of innovation in the way that technology is taught in higher education. And basically how I see it is that creativity hasn't really advanced that far, and then the techniques that they're teaching both in video production and information technology are very outdated. They're years behind, and honestly, I mean, if you're driven enough, at least I think a degree is not necessary to work in this career field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so not only are we going to address the curriculum as a whole, but we're also going to look at individual classes that are offered and the kind of overall flow of a higher education degree when it comes to the technology field, both from a computer standpoint and a creative standpoint.
I call school to the stand and accuse him of killing creativity, individuality, and being intellectually abusive. He's an ancient institution that has outlived his usage. So, Your Honor, this concludes my opening statement, and if I may present the evidence of my case, I will prove it.
Proceed.
Exhibit A. Here's a modern day phone. Recognize it? Here's a phone from 150 years ago. Big difference, right? Stay with me. Here's a car from today. And here's a car from 150 years ago. Big difference, right? Well, get this. Here's a classroom of today. And here's a class we used 150 years ago. Now ain't that a shame? In literally more than a century, nothing has changed.
So to start off this video, we basically need to have a definition of what the word art is and what the word technology is and what is the relationship between them both. So in our definition, this is just based on what we're kind of looking at, going about, art is the individual expression of emotion in a tangible way that other people can experience. It's basically creating a work of art, whether that's art itself, a video, a song, a script, a screenplay, a piece of music. That is art, and it's something that can capitalize on emotion as a whole, and then you can wrap that emotion into a tangible product and be able to share that with other people.
And then technology is just the advancement and betterment of people's lives through ever-changing and innovative methods. In light of these two definitions, technology and creativity cannot really be effectively taught within a classroom. So the best that you can hope for are overarching principles or concepts that contribute to a foundation. The problem with that is that college is not about a foundation. The foundation of education is created in students at a very young age in primary and secondary school. Once you get to higher education, you should already be beyond that point, and you should be building upon the foundation you've already created rather than creating a whole new baseline foundation that builds off of the existing one.
Therefore, because of this and the way the education system is structured, the best you can hope for is really useless when it comes to finding a real job in the real world.
So a quick disclaimer before we get into the heart of the video. What we want to make very clear is that this video is not an attack on any particular institution or even a professor or a course or even the curriculum that's offered within these courses, but rather just kind of our opinion on the culture itself and how much it kind of needs to change, and how we feel like because of the culture that's kind of trickles down from the job market into higher education, there's a lot of restrictions and limitations, and we feel like we're not being prepared properly. So
now that we've gotten all those formalities out of the way, we're going to kind of break this down into a focus on what goes into a degree, then what goes into the courses that make up that degree, and then the individual assignments that make up those courses, and kind of take it bit by bit as we go down and really narrow down what we believe some of the problems are with this current educational system. So I guess first, John, if you want us to start off with some of the classes you've been in and how they've maybe not really prepared you, or I know you were saying they've been based on mostly outdated information.
Yeah, so when it comes to computers, this is where it's frustrating to me, is that when it comes to computers and technology and the education surrounding them, there's really no way to stay on top of current technology. There's no way to teach current technology, because the instant the words come out of your mouth in a classroom, you're wrong. The rate that technology advances at, and the way we see growth in all areas, from hardware to software to even business practices in an IT or computer science environment, it's impossible to keep those current and up to date. So what the technology degrees kind of have to do by nature is they have to start teaching concepts. And like I mentioned earlier, they're overarching, they're very broad, and a lot of times it tends to be something that's very inaccurate. For example, I took a hardware class last semester, which, by the way, was the most useless class I've taken in all of college.
Yes.
Because as any of you know that have followed the channel for any amount of time, I'm already very passionate about hardware. I've built a few computers, so I kind of have the knowledge that class taught. I was beyond that point already. The final project in the class
build a computer.
was building a computer.
Like, how does that make sense?
Been there, done that. The first day of class, the professor said, by show of hands, how many of you can build a computer or have built a computer? And probably 90% of the class raised their hands. And then the final project was to build a computer. So even by kind of a broad survey of students, no one in that class really needed to take the class.
Well, and one thing I would mention too off of that is that if you want to build a computer, you don't need to go to college to learn how to build a computer for your final project. I'm just like, there's resources on YouTube. There's like, literally, look up in the search bar, go up here, click the search bar, type how to build a computer. I guarantee you will find thousands of videos of how to build a computer. So why is that being taught in a college scenario? And in my understanding, how do students not know that they have that extra resource that's available to them?
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off of that, the most frustrating point about the class was that the exams and the material we actually had to glean from the lectures was very specific, and it was all out of date. It was the A+, basically, study guide textbook from 2014.
It's 2018.
DDR4 RAM wasn't even mainstream yet. So there were questions on the exam about the max clock speed of DDR3 and how to get Ivy Bridge processors working in a Haswell motherboard. All these different things that are either out of date, irrelevant, or just unnecessary. We spent 2 whole weeks talking about how to, run a Xerox printer and how to reset all of the cables and how to set up FireWire printing. FireWire hasn't been used in how many years?
Many, many years. And I guess one of the big things here in the gist of this is that you're teaching skills that are not going to be necessary in the job market. And that's another point that I want to bring up, is that both of us are employed actually in the fields that we're talking about. So John has a job in IT working for our university, and I have a job working in broadcast for our university. So it's not we're not exposed to what the real world could be. I'm working broadcast, I'm touching professional equipment, I know how to operate this. John's working with actual computers and making it happen.
It's employed at the enterprise level with thousands of machines that we handle and manage, and working with the network and working with development of software and employing that and deploying that on a large scale basis. So it's not like we're coming from a position of not knowing. We know at least a little bit more than the average student about what the job market's going to look like. And so it's a lot easier for us to, in hindsight, look back at the education we've received so far and notice how lacking it is.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big things is that students need to be willing to learn. And most of your training too, once you're on the job, is on the job training. You can teach all this theory in a classroom, but not until you actually get behind the computer, or in my case, get behind the camera, get behind a switcher. Then it's all right, this is the practical hands-on with this, and I think that's extremely lacking in the classroom setting.
Yeah, the next thing I want to bring up as a really big deal, anybody that is employed in the computer world at all, if you look at high-paying salaried jobs at most institutions, whether it's in IT or computer science or software development, whatever it is, they're very specific about pay grades being tied to certifications. Any kind of certification, the A+ certification, networking certifications, software certifications across the board are incredibly important. And when the first time I heard them mentioned in my college career? 3 days after I got my job. So in the classroom, after 3 years of being a college student, not one time have certifications been brought up at all. And that's just disappointing to me, because that shows that there's kind of a faculty and curriculum discrepancy. There's this disconnect between what the faculty is preparing us for and reality, and they're not even aware of it. I think if you probably talk to most professors, especially the ones that have been teaching for 25, 30 years, they would have no idea, because these certifications are a fairly new concept.
Exactly. So that was the overview of just the computer science portion. So I want to talk a little bit about digital media as a whole at our university. And so basically the way this program works is it starts you off that if you know absolutely nothing, you can go from absolutely nothing to having a fairly decent understanding of digital media in your 4 years here. So in the beginning, they basically start you off with, they start you off in these molds. They start you off like, all right, here's how you learn Premiere, which in my mind, side note, you can learn Premiere. I learned Premiere not in the classroom. I learned it off of YouTube. Like, literally.
And I learned it from him. You know, it's a software. It's not
software.
a classroom.
No, you don't need to learn the software. And the way we were taught Premiere was by watching lynda.com tutorials. So we watched tutorials that we could have accessed anyway on our own, but tell me how this makes sense. Please leave a comment down below. I'm very serious.
Yeah, the education, there's this YouTube education mentality that the professors kind of realize they can't really teach the information. And so there are two options. They either pigeonhole students into this mold of creativity that everyone comes out, this cookie cutter.
Right. No one knows how to think for themselves on a set because they're not given the opportunities to. They're basically offered, they said, all right, here, go make a project, but you can only do these things, you can only do these things, and if you run into a problem, well, we don't teach you how to solve that problem.
So please explain why you treat students like cookie cutter frames or snapback hats, giving them this one-size-fits-all crap.
Watch your language.
Sorry, Your Honor, but if a doctor prescribed the exact same medicine to all of his patients, the results would be tragic. So many people would get sick, yet when it comes to school, this is exactly what happens. This educational malpractice where one teacher stands in front of 20 kids, each one having different strengths, different needs, different gifts, different dreams, and you teach the same thing the same way? That's horrific.
Whereas, you know, it's in the real world, you're like, no, I'm dealt with a problem. How am I going to solve this? And that's like one of the big things that's lacking in this curriculum. It's just everyone is bound by these guidelines. And if you deviate anywhere outside of these guidelines, that's when like you get points knocked off. It's like you were outside the scope. But they need to because there needs to be some sort of way to grade you. Mm-hmm. So that's why they do. They pigeonhole you into a specific criteria and guidelines. However, when you go and you actually do a job and you are working for a client, those guidelines are built into your head.
Exactly, and that's what takes us back to our definition of art and creativity. It's not objective, and so the idea that you can teach it objectively within a classroom environment is just, it's patently false. You can't force creativity.
You can't teach it either.
Exactly. Creativity is a cultivated personal experience based on emotion and based on kind of the gifts that we're given to actually take a product and then turn it into a creative expression.
Exactly. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've been in a classroom, I've been asked by fellow students who have said, all right, so now what's the right way to do this? And I'm like, well, there is no really right way to do this. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do? What's the mood you're trying to set? What's the story you're trying to tell? And from there, we can work on a solution.
So to take things back a little bit to the computer science and software development side of things, one of the biggest problems I've noticed is with the programming courses. This is kind of across the board. If you compare courses from MIT, Virginia Tech, Duke, all of these kind of high-level schools that teach computer science and technology, they offer very similar courses. What I would say from my personal experience is that the programming courses, whether it's object-oriented with Java or web development with HTML or anything C-based or even SQL, they're not taught well at all. I've had a few separate classes where the time slot we're allotted is an hour and 15 minutes, and the professor will teach for 45 minutes or so. And by teach, I mean lecture verbatim off of a PowerPoint that's posted on Blackboard.
So you can download and teach yourself.
Okay, class is over. If you have any questions, come ask. So they're not actually expounding upon the material. They're not delivering content. They're just kind of droning on about something that's already up on the screen that I can go read for myself in my apartment if I want to. So it's a waste of time. It's not taught effectively. And because of those two things, I've actually found myself taking quite a few of the programming courses online in an 8-week environment where I can feel this pressure and not feel bad for teaching myself. You know, I can go Google a YouTube tutorial on how to implement a certain JavaScript line into a web programming assignment and feel like I'm actually learning something, rather than if I did that in a classroom environment, I'd feel like I was somehow like cheating around the professor, kind of taking away from something they might be teaching. And so I feel like there's a real big discrepancy between how classes should be taught and how classes are taught, even when it comes to programming.
All right, so now moving from the broad overall degree level down to the individual courses themselves. So basically for the courses themselves, kind of going back to my original analogy of basically starting you off with dead nothing, and I want to be a YouTuber, and then moving you all the way up here to being a professional. The way that the program works, the program starts you off learning how to edit, then it moves you into the fundamentals of video and audio production, then it moves you up to some intermediate video production stuff, and then it moves you up to some studio stuff, and then they call you done. So in essence, what ends up happening is, I can tell you from experience, the final project of the fundamentals of editing class is a green screen project with a lower third. You shoot none of your own footage yourself, and you're given the footage to edit, and you literally just key out a green screen and pop in a lower third. That's the final project for the entire class. So that just goes to show you what you've been learning up until that point. Then from there you move on into the fundamentals of video production itself, where the final product is to basically shoot a testimonial and shoot it with B-roll. What? Like, how is that preparing anybody for anything like that? That's not challenging. And maybe it's challenging for the students, but in the class, the description of the syllabus says, and I quote, "The student will be able to learn how to pan and tilt a tripod." Like, come on. Like, just really. And then part of this comes from my experience, having that firsthand experience coming into college and working for this university has given me the ability to work on professional grade broadcast equipment. So that's been switchers, cameras, graphics, the whole 9 yards. And going into these studio production classes, I had a professor literally come to me and yell at me, not yell at me, yelling is a bit of an exaggeration, but she'd come in and like scolded me. She was like, "No, you can't talk to students and reprimand them for doing something wrong, because that's not how it is in the real world." I said, "You've got to be kidding me."
That's exactly how it is.
That is exactly how it is in the real world, and like, what are you talking about? But I sucked it down. I said, okay.
I mean, the whole point of live broadcast is perfection. You don't get a do-over.
No,
so if someone messes
second
up,
chances. It's this purposeful coddling, almost, if you will, of students in the program and not exposing them to what harsh critique looks like.
Yeah. And when it comes to the technology degrees, kind of an overall pathway that you go through is, it starts off with kind of the history of computers. There are 2 whole classes dedicated to the history of computation and the history of the technology behind it and the implementation of it. And then it moves from the history to kind of this weird pseudo-programming history class where it combines the 2. There's a little bit of kind of every language. There's some Java, there's some HTML, and then we're still talking about, like the first tape deck recorders and the first ever line of code and Tim Berners-Lee with the invention of the World Wide Web. And then you move into a little, depending on your degree, because it is a little bit broader, but in my specific degree, which is cybersecurity, we move into a little bit of the networking and subnetting side, and then we do a little bit of the cybersecurity policies stuff, which I don't know why there's an entire class on cybersecurity policies, because they change from institution to institution. And like we've said, all they can do is teach these kind of broad, overarching, they basically hit the government regulations, FERPA, FISMA, HIPAA, kind of all of these different cybersecurity standards or guidelines that are very broad instead of specifics. And then beyond that point, we kind of get into some very specific stuff. So I will end up taking classes on very specific cybersecurity concepts. I'll be taking classes on encryption. I'll be taking classes on decoding. All these kinds of things that there's potential I see in that degree, but at the same time, there's really no reason for that to be taught in the classroom. I mean, what are you getting out of it? Oh, you can write a 25-page paper? Get back to me when that's relevant in the workforce ever.
I have never written a 25-page paper.
At work.
At work, no.
It's like, it's the same concept of having, IT students or even some computer science students take calculus. No programming language will ever involve calculus. And the rationale behind it is, oh, it helps with problem solving. If you're 18, 19, 20 years old and you don't have problem solving skills,
there's a bigger issue at play here.
You should go back to like 7th grade and reevaluate. And that goes back to the foundation, how the first almost 2 years of the degree are expanding a foundation that gets built up very little over the course of the 4-year program. Whereas it needs to become more and more specific and built higher and higher on specific things until you actually have a valuable work skill set.
Basically how it goes is they train you to be decent in a lot of things, and then slowly, it's like a slow pyramid. And that's basically how it is between the both of these two.
It doesn't scratch the surface. And I think in conclusion, that's what we want to get down to, is explaining the fact that although it's not necessarily the fault of the colleges or the fault of the professors, there's this lack of preparation. And we feel unprepared for the workforce based on the fact that the degrees we're in, the programs we're in, really don't get us higher than about 6 months of actual work environment knowledge.
Right, and that's the thing is that if like both of us, I think, didn't have these jobs that we were in, I would not feel prepared to go out into the workforce knowing what I know now. And that's just something as true as, you know, college students leave college and go out into the real world. Many of them aren't finding jobs, and I think part of them, at least in the technology and, you know, video world, because of these reasons. They're just not able to provide students with an opportunity to say, all right, you know, I'm gonna go out and run my own business. All right, how do you do that? Like, you know, I figured it out, I'm still figuring it out, I don't know it all, but it's like, all right, but like, how do you do accounting? How do you like pay the bills? Like, there's things like that that are much more practical that I think can be educated rather than educating these broad creative concepts or these broad computer science concepts. And that's basically what it comes down to.
Where does the solution come from? The solution has to be from the job market. Companies have to be more and more willing, as we see advancements in technology and creativity and just the way people hire for jobs. Companies need to be more willing to hire people that don't have a standard 4-year piece of paper.
Right.
And so the solution is that the culture within companies and that mindset needs to change, and hiring managers and HR departments and that kind of thing just need to be more willing to look for people with work experience rather than I sat through 4 years of a classroom education and got a piece of paper.
Right, because what they're looking for, when they come and they hire you for the job, when I got hired for my job, I submitted them a demo reel. I said, hi, I'm Michael, here's my demo reel. And they're like, okay, wow, this is really awesome. Like, let's hire you.
Yeah.
They're gonna hire me based off of what my work looks like, and like the 4-year degree is supplementary to that. It's like, oh, like you have this nice degree, but we wanna see what you've done.
It's the same in technology. It's like they want a portfolio. It's like, what have you coded? What have you worked on? You know, what work experience do you have? Even within the IT world, it's like, what actual networking have you done? What cyber defense have you done? What have you actually accomplished, rather than you sat in a chair on your butt and, you know, got a minimum of a 2.0 GPA for 4 years?
So yeah, that about wraps things up. This is sure to be a lively discussion. So please hang out in the comment section down below. We will be down there. We'd love to have like a discussion that gets going, and you know, maybe like throw in your own ideas. Like, are you a student in college? What are your experiences in this you know, growing and ever-changing world of technology? We'd love to know. Go ahead and subscribe for more content. Go check out our channel, and yeah, we will catch you all in the next video.
Bye.